Thanks for the platinum upgrade, darling, Victor announced, strutting into our kitchen with designer luggage in tow. He casually tossed his new leather wallet onto the counter and stood there, insufferably smug in his crisp linen suit and Italian, shoes that definitely weren't in our closet last week. First-class champagne, 5-star hotels in Barcelona. You should see the photos from the yacht party. I couldn't help it. I burst out laughing. What's so funny? He demanded, frowning. Oh, Victor, I said, smiling as I sipped my coffee. You have absolutely no idea what you've just done. My name is Olivia, and I'm 36 years old. For the past 8 years, I've been married to a man who I once thought was ambitious and charming, but turned out to be a carefully constructed facade of empty promises. While I built a successful career in risk management for a major financial institution, Victor bounced between entrepreneurial ventures that somehow never quite materialized into actual income. I ignored the red flags for years, the unexplained expenses, the vague business meetings, the growing gap between our financial contributions to our marriage. I wanted to believe we were partners, that his big break was just around the corner. I convinced myself that supporting his dreams meant supporting him financially, even when those dreams seemed increasingly disconnected from reality. You just don't understand business, Liv, he'd say whenever I asked about concrete plans or timelines. Sometimes you have to spend money to make money, and somehow we were always in the spending phase, never quite reaching the making part. Our friends saw Victor as charismatic and full of potential. My parents adored his confident manner and ambitious plans. Only my sister Diane saw through him from the beginning. He's all talk, she warned me over brunch 3 months after we started dating. I dismissed her concerns as overprotectiveness. I wish I'd listened. Last year, as I received another promotion at work, Victor's latest venture, a luxury concierge service for travelers, collapsed before it even launched. I came home with champagne to celebrate my success, only to find him sulking on the couch, blaming the economy, his unreliable business partner, the bank that rejected his loan application. Everyone but himself. That night, as I comforted him and assured him there would be other opportunities, I noticed something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Resentment. Not at himself or his circumstances, but at me, at my success, at the growing disparity between our contributions to our shared life. Still, I persisted in believing in us, in him. That's what marriage is about, isn't it? Supporting each other through hardships? I told myself the imbalance was temporary, that his passion and creativity would eventually translate into something tangible. Then, last month, Victor crossed a line that even my considerable patience couldn't excuse. I'd been working late on a critical risk assessment for a new financial product our bank was launching. My role involved identifying potential vulnerabilities in our security systems, creating controlled weak points that would help us test and strengthen our defenses against fraud. That particular night, I'd left my laptop open on the dining table while I went upstairs to shower and prepare for bed. Victor had claimed he was turning in early, complaining of a headache. But as I stepped out of the shower, I heard the faint sound of typing coming from downstairs. Call it professional paranoia or just intuition, but something made me move quietly to the staircase. From there, I could see Victor hunched over my laptop, frantically copying information onto his phone. I watched in stunned silence as my husband photographed my credit card details, personal identification information, and login credentials that I'd stored in an encrypted folder, a folder he had somehow managed to access. The next morning, I said nothing. I acted normally, kissed him goodbye as he left for a networking event, and then immediately called my department's security team. By noon, I had changed all my passwords, flagged my accounts for suspicious activity, and implemented emergency protocols that we typically reserve for high-risk security breaches. But here's where Victor's plan went catastrophically wrong for him. The credit card information he stole wasn't for my personal account. It was a controlled test account we used to monitor and track fraudulent activities. A honeypot specifically, designed to catch thieves and identify their patterns. Every transaction made with that card would trigger an immediate alert, complete with location data, timestamp, and other identifying information. This wasn't just any monitoring system. It was one I had personally helped design to be undetectable to the user while gathering overwhelming evidence for prosecution. For the next 3 days, I watched with a mixture of fascination and heartbreak as alerts flooded my secure work email. Victor had wasted no time. First-class flight to Barcelona, luxury hotel suite, Michelin star restaurants, designer shopping sprees on Passeig de Gracia. He even rented a yacht for a day excursion along the Costa Brava. Each transaction painted a clearer picture of a man who believed he had successfully deceived his wife and was now living the high life on her dime. What he didn't realize was that every swipe of that card, every PIN entry, every signature was being documented and compiled into what would become the most damning evidence imaginable. By day 2, my colleagues at the bank's security division were in regular contact. Olivia, this is the most comprehensive fraud case we've documented in real time, my director, Marcus, told me over a secured line. The data we're collecting is extraordinary. But are you okay with this? It's your former husband, I corrected him, surprised by how little emotion I felt saying those words. And yes, I'm okay with it. Continue monitoring. On day 4, I received a message from Victor, a selfie from Park Güell with the Gaudi architecture behind him, captioned, "Living my best life. Missing you." Kind of. I simply replied with a heart emoji, encouraging him to continue digging his own grave. On day 7, Marcus called again. "We have more than enough," he said. "The international transactions have triggered automated alerts to financial authorities in both countries. They're waiting for your green light to proceed." "Not yet," I replied. "Let him come home first. I want to see his face when he realizes what's happened." And that brings us to this morning. Victor returning from his European adventure, strutting into our kitchen as if he'd conquered the world, showing off his stolen luxuries while completely unaware that he had just participated in the most comprehensive case study of cross-border credit card fraud my department had ever documented. First-class champagne, 5-star hotels in Barcelona. You should see the photos from the yacht party, he boasted, scrolling through his phone to show me evidence of his theft. I couldn't help it. I burst out laughing. "What's so funny?" he demanded, frowning. "Oh, Victor," I said, smiling as I sipped my coffee. "You have absolutely no idea what you've just done." Victor's frown deepened as he set his phone down on the counter. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his confident demeanor faltering. Slightly. I took another sip of my coffee, savoring the moment. "Why don't you tell me more about Barcelona first? I'm fascinated to hear all about your spontaneous vacation." That was the thing about Victor. He had always been so convinced of his own cleverness that direct confrontation rarely worked. It was better to let him talk, to give him enough rope to hang himself with his own words. I've always been methodical, by nature. Even as a child, I approached problems systematically, breaking them down into manageable pieces. My parents recognized this early, encouraging my analytical tendencies with logic puzzles and mystery novels. By the time I was in high school, I knew I wanted to work in risk assessment or security. The satisfaction of identifying vulnerabilities and designing protective measures just made sense to my brain. Victor, in contrast, was all charisma and impulse. We met 8 years ago at a friend's rooftop party in the city. I was 28 recently, promoted to junior risk analyst at Meridian Financial, and he was 31, describing himself as a venture consultant between projects. He approached me with 2 glasses of champagne and a confidence that was admittedly attractive. "You're the only person at this party who isn't trying too hard," he said, handing me a glass. I find that intriguing. We talked all night. Victor had a way of making you feel like the most important person in the room. He asked thoughtful questions about my work, seemed genuinely interested in risk management concepts that usually made people's eyes glaze over, and shared ambitious plans for connecting luxury service providers with high-net-worth clients. "The wealthy are overwhelmed with options," he explained, gesturing expressively. "What they lack is curation and convenience. That's the gap I'm positioning to fill." It sounded plausible, promising even. And when he followed up the next day, with theater tickets and dinner at a restaurant I had mentioned wanting to try, I was impressed by his attentiveness. Our courtship was a whirlwind of thoughtful gestures, weekend getaways, and deep conversations about our dreams. Victor spoke of his business ideas with such conviction that their success seemed inevitable. I found myself swept up in his vision, imagining us as power partners, me providing stability while he built something innovative and exciting. We married after 18 months of dating, against my sister Diane's explicit advice. "You barely know him," she insisted over lunch, a week after his proposal. "His business cards say entrepreneur. That's not a job, Liv, that's a personality type." "You're not being fair," I defended. "He's working on multiple projects right now. The investor meetings are going well." Diane sighed, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Just tell me you've seen his credit report. Please tell me you've done that basic diligence." I hadn't, of course. It seemed unromantic, transactional. Victor and I had discussed finances. In broad terms, he was upfront about not having substantial savings, explaining that he reinvested most of his earnings into his business ventures. I had good savings and a stable income. We would balance each other out. The first 2 years of marriage matched my optimistic expectations. Victor landed a consulting contract with a boutique hotel chain, bringing in decent money. We moved into a beautiful apartment with views of the park. I continued advancing at Meridian, moving from basic risk assessment to helping design security protocols for digital banking products. Then Victor's contract ended, and the pattern began. He would announce a new venture with tremendous enthusiasm, an app connecting travelers with local experiences, a premium subscription box for business travelers, a concierge service for vacation property owners. Each idea sounded viable on the surface. He would work intensely for a few weeks, have meetings with potential partners or investors, sometimes even create branding materials or basic websites. But somehow, the ventures never materialized into actual businesses. There was always a reason. Market timing wasn't right. An investor pulled out. A potential partner wasn't aligned with his vision. And with each failure, our financial responsibilities shifted more heavily onto my shoulders. "It's temporary," he would assure me, as I took on our mortgage payments, car insurance, groceries, and vacations. "The next one is going to be the breakthrough." By year 4 of our marriage, I was covering virtually all our expenses while Victor contributed only his charm and expensive taste. When I raised concerns about our imbalanced finances, he would become defensive. "You know how startups work," he'd say. "Amazon wasn't profitable for years. I'm building something with longevity, not chasing quick money like your banking friends." Irony, of course, was that I was the one working 60-hour weeks while he took 3-hour lunches with potential investors who never seemed to invest. Still, there were good times. Victor could be incredibly attentive when he wanted to be. He remembered birthdays and anniversaries, organized surprises that made me feel special, and in those moments, I would think perhaps this was simply the cost of being with someone creative and entrepreneurial. Traditional jobs stifled him. I told myself I was investing in our future. By year 6, I had been promoted to Senior Risk Management Director at Meridian. My specialty had become designing and implementing security systems that could identify fraudulent patterns across international banking transactions. My team created honeypot accounts, dummy financial products with subtle vulnerabilities that allowed us to track how sophisticated thieves operated. These systems were revolutionizing how the bank detected and prevented fraud, earning me recognition throughout the industry. At home, however, things were deteriorating. Victor's ventures had become increasingly vague. When I asked specific questions about his latest project, he would become irritable or change the subject. Our joint savings account, which I had faithfully contributed to monthly, was mysteriously drained after Victor claimed a once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunity required immediate action. The opportunity, like all before it, somehow evaporated after the money was gone. I began noticing other concerning patterns. Credit card statements with charges at high-end restaurants on days he claimed to be working from home. Unexplained weekend absences attributed to investor retreats. Passwords suddenly changed on accounts I used to have access to. My analytical mind recognized these as red flags, but my heart resisted the obvious conclusion. I didn't want to be the stereotype, the successful woman with the freeloading husband. I didn't want to admit that I had been methodically precise about everything in my life except my choice of partner. Diane saw it clearly. During a rare sisters' weekend getaway last year, while Victor was supposedly attending an entrepreneurship conference in Chicago, she finally said what I had been avoiding. "He's using you, Liv," she stated bluntly as we walked along the beach. "You've built this amazing career, this beautiful life, and he's contributing nothing but taking everything." "That's not fair," I replied automatically, though the defense felt hollow even to me. "His business ventures are just taking longer than expected to—" "8 years is not taking longer than expected," Diane interrupted. "It's a pattern. A choice. He's chosen to let you carry him." That conversation planted a seed that I couldn't ignore. When I returned home, I began paying closer attention, documenting discrepancies between Victor's claims and reality. I noticed the designer clothes appearing in his closet despite our supposed budget constraints. I saw the expensive dinners charged to his private credit card, the one I was helping pay off each month because his business expenses were supposedly necessary investments in our future. But the definitive moment came when I discovered he had opened a separate bank account I knew nothing about. While using our shared laptop one evening, I noticed a banking notification pop up on the screen. Victor had left himself logged into an email I'd never seen before. The message confirmed a transfer of $5,000, money I recognized from a bonus I had recently received and deposited into our joint account, into a private account under his name only. That discovery led me to dig deeper, uncovering a pattern of financial infidelity stretching back years. Victor had been systematically siphoning money from our shared resources into his private accounts, while continuing to pressure me to cover more of our joint expenses because his business was at a critical development stage. Even with this evidence, I hesitated to confront him directly. The risk analyst in me knew that people who engage in deception often escalate when cornered. Instead, I began quietly protecting myself, separating our finances where possible, securing my important documents, and monitoring our accounts more vigilantly. Which brings us back to that night last month when I caught Victor stealing my credit card details from my work laptop. In that moment, watching him photograph my financial information, everything crystallized. This wasn't a partner experiencing temporary setbacks. This was a calculating individual who had been playing me for a fool for nearly a decade. And now, as he stood in our kitchen in his expensive new clothes, boasting about his European adventure funded by his theft from me, the last pieces fell into place. "Barcelona was amazing," Victor continued, oblivious to the storm brewing. "You should have seen the presidential suite at the Hotel Arts. 43rd floor, panoramic views of the Mediterranean. The bathroom alone was bigger than our first apartment." He scrolled through photos on his phone, turning the screen toward me to display his stolen luxury. I nodded, encouraging him to continue his detailed confession. "And how exactly did you afford all this?" Victor's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered. Remember that investor I told you about? The one interested in my luxury travel platform? He finally came through with some initial funding. This trip was part research, part celebration. The lie rolled off his tongue so smoothly that I almost admired his commitment to the deception. Almost. Interesting, I replied, setting down my coffee cup. And did this mysterious investor also buy you the Breguet watch you're wearing? The one that costs more than our mortgage? Victor glanced down at his wrist, his expression flickering between pride and wariness. You have a good eye. It was a gift, actually. A token of appreciation from a potential partner in Barcelona. I smiled, letting the absurdity of his lies hang in the air between us. A token of appreciation worth $30,000? How generous of this person you've just met. Victor's confidence was visibly wavering now, unsure why I wasn't reacting with my usual combination of suspicion and reluctant acceptance. He didn't realize that we had moved beyond that stage, that the game had fundamentally changed. Look, Olivia, he said, adopting the patient tone he used when he thought I was being unreasonable. I know this seems sudden, but this is exactly what I've been working toward all these years. Things are finally happening. I have meetings next week that are going to change everything for us. I nodded thoughtfully, as if considering his words. Tell me more about the yacht party, I said. That photo with the champagne tower looked particularly impressive. Victor's face lit up, relieved that I seemed to be buying his story and even showing interest. There was nothing he loved more than an audience for his supposed achievements. The yacht party was incredible, he said, pulling out his phone to show me more photos. One of my Barcelona contacts invited me, a real estate developer with connections throughout the Mediterranean. 60-foot yacht, crew of 8, chef flown in from Paris. He swiped through images of himself lounging on white leather seats, champagne flute in hand, the Barcelona coastline shimmering in the background. All these influential people in one place, tech investors, luxury brand representatives, property developers. The networking opportunities were priceless. He paused on a photo of himself with his arm around a tanned older man in an expensive-looking linen shirt. This guy right here owns half the boutique hotels on the Costa Brava. We're discussing a partnership for my concierge platform. I nodded, studying the image. And when exactly was this party? Last Thursday, he replied without hesitation. We set sail around noon, cruised up the coast, anchored in a private cove for dinner, didn't get back to port until after midnight. I made a mental note of the date and time. It matched perfectly with the $12,000 yacht rental charge that had triggered alerts in our monitoring system, one of the largest single transactions in his spending spree. It looks amazing, I said, keeping my tone light. You must have been planning this trip for a while. Victor hesitated, just for a second. It came together pretty quickly, actually. That's how these opportunities work. You have to be ready to move when the right doors open. Of course, I agreed. And speaking of moving quickly, I'm curious about something. How did you book all this on such short notice? The flights, the hotel, the yacht? That can't have been easy to arrange. His eyes darted away from mine momentarily. I have my ways. Building a luxury concierge business means cultivating the right relationships, people who can make things happen. I took a slow sip of my coffee. People who accept credit cards, you mean? Victor's smile froze. Among other payment methods, sure. Interesting, I said, because I could have sworn our credit limits wouldn't cover expenses like these. Especially after we discussed cutting back while you were between ventures. He waved a dismissive hand. This wasn't personal spending, Liv. This was business development. Sometimes you have to project success to achieve success. These people wouldn't have given me the time of day if I'd shown up flying economy and staying at a 3-star hotel. The audacity was almost impressive. Even now, caught in a web of obvious lies, He was spinning justifications, reframing his theft and deception as strategic business moves. For years, this tactic had worked on me, making me question my own reasonable concerns, making me feel small-minded for focusing on practical matters like our actual bank balance. But not anymore. Because 4 weeks ago, everything changed. It was a Tuesday night. I'd been working late on a critical project, a new security protocol that would help banks identify and track sophisticated fraud operations across international borders. Meridian had invested heavily in the technology, and my team was responsible for its successful implementation. The system used specialized algorithms to detect unusual spending patterns, flagging them for investigation while simultaneously creating digital trails that could be used for prosecution. But the most innovative aspect was the honeypot approach, intentionally vulnerable accounts that would attract fraudsters, allowing us to study their methods while gathering evidence. I'd created several test scenarios that evening, including a high-limit credit card profile that would appear legitimate to anyone who accessed it. The profile included my name as the primary cardholder, but was entirely disconnected from my actual finances. A dummy account designed specifically to catch thieves. By midnight, my eyes were burning from staring at screens. I saved my work, closed some files but left others open, deliberately, as I sometimes did when I planned to continue first thing in the morning, and went upstairs to shower before bed. Victor had said he was turning in early with a migraine. I'd brought him water and medication around 9, and he'd been curled under the covers, eyes closed, breathing evenly. I remember thinking how peaceful he looked, how vulnerable. Even after years of broken promises and financial strain, those quiet moments still triggered my protective instincts. The shower helped clear my head. As I toweled off my hair, I realized I'd forgotten to send an important email to my team about the next day's testing schedule. Wrapping myself in a robe, I headed back downstairs to the dining room where my laptop sat. I was halfway down the stairs when I saw him. Victor, whom I'd left supposedly sleeping with a migraine, was hunched over my laptop, his face illuminated by the screen's blue glow. From my position on the stairs, I could see him clearly, but he was too absorbed in his task to notice me. At first, I thought he might be checking email or browsing the internet, but something about his posture, furtive, tense, told me this was different. I remained perfectly still, watching as he navigated through my files with surprising familiarity. He found what he was looking for, the financial profiles I'd been working on. I watched in disbelief as he opened the dummy account information, his eyes widening at the credit limit displayed. Without hesitation, he pulled out his phone and began taking photos of the screen, capturing the credit card number, expiration date, security code, and associated personal details. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain he would hear it. This wasn't opportunistic snooping or casual invasion of privacy. This was calculated theft, from me, his wife, the person who had supported him financially and emotionally for 8 years. I considered confronting him immediately, but stopped myself. The risk analyst in me knew better than to act without all the information. Instead, I silently retreated up the stairs and back to the bathroom, turning on the faucet to create noise while I processed what I'd witnessed. By the time I emerged, Victor had returned to bed, once again playing the role of the suffering, sleeping husband. I slipped in beside him, my mind racing with implications and options. Sleep was impossible. I stared at the ceiling, reconsidering every aspect of our relationship through this new lens. How many times had he accessed my personal information without my knowledge? How many of his business opportunities had been funded by similar betrayals? The man lying next to me, whose breathing I could feel against my skin, had become a stranger, or perhaps had always been one. At 5 a.m., I gave up on sleep and went downstairs. My laptop was exactly where I'd left it, screen still open to the files Victor had photographed. I immediately called Marcus, my director at Meridian, I need to speak with you before the office fills up, I said when he answered, my voice steadier than I felt. It's about a potential security breach. Marcus agreed to meet me at 7. I showered, dressed, and left the house while Victor still slept, blissfully unaware that his actions had triggered a seismic shift in our marriage. In Marcus's office, I laid out exactly what had happened. Let me get this straight, he said, leaning forward in his chair. Your husband accessed the honeypot account we created for the international fraud detection system? I nodded. He photographed all the details for the high-limit card profile that Marcus blinked, processing this information. Olivia, I don't know whether to be horrified for you personally or impressed by how perfectly this validates our system design. Both are appropriate, I replied. The question is, what do we do now? We spent the next hour outlining options. We could shut down the account immediately, preventing Victor from using the stolen information. We could confront him with evidence of his attempted theft. We could involve law enforcement right away. But then Marcus suggested an alternative approach. If you can handle it personally, he said carefully, this presents a unique opportunity. The system is designed to track exactly this kind of activity. If he attempts to use the card, we'll have documented evidence of every transaction. I finished his thought. A perfect case study of cross-border financial fraud. Marcus nodded. But I need to be clear. This would mean letting him proceed, at least initially. Watching the fraud unfold in real time. I wouldn't suggest it if these were your actual personal finances at risk, but since it's a protected test account, we let him hang himself, I said, the decision crystallizing in my mind. Only if you're comfortable with that, Marcus emphasized. This is your husband we're talking about. There would be serious consequences for him once we have the evidence. I thought about the man I'd watched photograph my credit card information, while he thought I was in the shower. I thought about 8 years of broken promises and financial manipulation. I thought about the separate bank account he'd hidden from me, filled with money diverted from our shared resources. I'm comfortable with it, I said finally. Set up the monitoring protocols. I want to see exactly what he does. Over the next few days, I maintained a perfect facade of normalcy at home. I left for work at my usual time, discussed ordinary topics over dinner, and gave no indication that anything had changed. Victor, too, seemed to be operating under a careful veneer, mentioning a business trip he needed to take for a few days. European investors, he explained vaguely over dinner 3 days after I'd caught him. I've been cultivating these relationships for months. This could be the breakthrough we've been waiting for. I nodded supportively. That sounds promising. When do you leave? Tomorrow morning? He said. It came together quickly, but I couldn't pass up the opportunity. Of course not, I agreed. Do you need me to drive you to the airport? He seemed almost disappointed by my lack of questions or resistance. No, I've arranged a car service, early flight. Well, I hope it goes well, I said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. I believe in you. The look of relief that washed over his face was almost comical. He'd expected suspicion, maybe even confrontation, but my apparent trust disarmed him completely. The next morning, he kissed me goodbye with renewed confidence, wheeling a suitcase I recognized as one of our most expensive pieces. I'll text you when I land, he promised. Safe travels, I replied, smiling at the door as his car pulled away. As soon as he was gone, I contacted Marcus. He's on the move, I said. Start monitoring for activity. We didn't have to wait long. By afternoon, the alerts began flooding in. The first alert came through at 3:42 p.m., a charge at Barcelona El Prat Airport for a private car service totaling $380. I was sitting in a budget meeting when my secure work phone buzzed with the notification. Excusing myself, I stepped into the hallway to check the message. Transaction alert. Test account RMT0472. Airport Transportation Service. Barcelona, Spain. Amount $380. Time, 15:42 CET. A strange calm washed over me as I stared at the screen. There it was, the first concrete evidence of Victor's betrayal. Not just the betrayal of accessing my information, but of actually using it, of crossing the line from contemplation to action. I took a screenshot and sent it to Marcus with a simple message: "It's begun." By the time I returned to my desk after the meeting, 3 more alerts had arrived. A check-in charge at Hotel Arts Barcelona, a 5-star luxury property overlooking the Mediterranean, for a 5-night stay in their executive suite. $7,200. A dinner charge at a Michelin-starred restaurant in the Gothic Quarter. $340. A boutique clothing purchase on Passeig de Gracia. $1,990. Victor wasn't just dipping his toe into fraudulent waters, he was diving in head first, immediately gravitating toward the most extravagant experiences Barcelona had to offer. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process the reality unfolding on my phone screen. The man I had shared a bed with for 8 years, who had complained just last week about the cost of replacing our worn-out kitchen faucet, was now spending thousands on luxury hotel suites and designer clothes with stolen credit card information. My phone rang, Marcus calling from the cybersecurity division. "Are you seeing these charges?" he asked without preamble. "Yes," I replied, my voice level despite the churning in my stomach. "He's certainly not being subtle." "The pattern recognition system has already flagged it as suspicious activity," Marcus continued. "High-value international charges in rapid succession. If this were a real account, we'd be contacting the cardholder for verification." "And that's exactly what makes this so valuable as a case study," I said, professional instincts kicking in despite the personal betrayal. "We're watching fraud happen in real time, start to finish, with complete knowledge of the perpetrator's identity and methods." "How are you doing with all this?" Marcus asked, his tone softening. "This isn't just data to you." I paused, considering the question. How was I doing? The analytical part of my brain had taken over, processing information, evaluating options, maintaining emotional distance. But underneath that professional veneer, something was shifting, a strange mixture of grief and liberation. "I'm fine," I said finally. "Better than expected, actually. There's something clarifying about having your worst suspicions confirmed so definitively." "That's one way of looking at it," Marcus replied. "We'll continue monitoring. The system is recording everything. Geolocation data for each transaction, timestamps, merchant information. If you want to proceed with building a case, we'll have more than enough evidence." "Keep tracking," I instructed. "I want to see how far he takes this." Over the next 3 days, Victor's spending escalated in both frequency and extravagance. Designer boutiques along Barcelona's most exclusive shopping streets, VIP nightclub experiences with premium bottle service, a custom-tailored suit from one of Spain's most prestigious ateliers, a private guided tour of Gaudí landmarks. Each transaction triggered another alert, another piece of evidence in the case building against him. On day 4, a charge appeared that made even my desensitized heart skip a beat. $12,000 for a single-day yacht charter along the Costa Brava, including full crew, gourmet catering, and premium beverages. I stared at the notification, trying to reconcile. This level of indulgence with the man who had criticized me last month for ordering takeout twice in 1 week because we need to be more budget-conscious while my business is in development. That evening, Victor sent me a casual text. "Meetings going well. Making great connections. How are things at home?" The audacity was breathtaking. I responded with deliberate blandness. "Nothing exciting here. Just work and errands. Glad your meetings are productive," he replied with a heart emoji, apparently satisfied that his fiction remained intact. What Victor couldn't know, was that each transaction was creating a comprehensive digital trail. The security system I had helped design wasn't just recording charges, it was building a multi-dimensional profile of his activities. Every time the card was used, it captured not only the transaction details, but also data from the point of sale, system, security camera timestamps that could be subpoenaed if needed, GPS coordinates from his phone if he used digital payment methods, and even biometric data like fingerprints from modern payment terminals. Our system cross-referenced this information against known fraud patterns, creating a probability map that linked seemingly separate activities into a coherent picture of deliberate criminal behavior. It differentiated between potential coincidence and clear intent, and Victor's actions registered at the highest level of intentionality our algorithms could measure. On day 5 of Victor's business trip, Marcus called me into a meeting with Meridian's head of legal affairs, Eleanor Walsh. "Olivia," Eleanor began, her expression serious. "Marcus has briefed me on the situation with your husband and the test account. First, let me say how sorry I am that you're dealing with this personally. It's an extraordinary circumstance." I nodded, appreciating her acknowledgement but eager to move past sympathy to action. "From a legal standpoint," she continued, "we have a complicated situation. On one hand, we have overwhelming evidence of credit card fraud across international boundaries, activity that would typically trigger immediate criminal referral. On the other hand, this involved our test system, and the perpetrator is your spouse, which introduces personal and ethical considerations. What are my options?" I asked, maintaining the professional demeanor that had become my armor. Eleanor laid them out systematically. Option 1. We shut down the account immediately, preventing any further fraudulent charges. You confront your husband with what you know, and handle it as a private marital matter. That seems inadequate given the scale of his actions, I observed. Agreed. Eleanor nodded. Option 2. We compile all the evidence we've gathered and present it to authorities as a criminal case. This would likely result in your husband's arrest upon return to the country, possibly even extradition if we coordinate with Spanish authorities quickly enough. The image of Victor being arrested at the airport flashed through my mind, a public spectacle that would undoubtedly make local news, especially given my position at Meridian. While there would be a certain poetic justice to it, the professional complications and personal exposure gave me pause. Is there a middle option? I asked. Something that ensures consequences without creating a media circus? Marcus and Eleanor exchanged glances. There is a third approach, Marcus said carefully. We continue monitoring until he returns home. We compile all evidence into a comprehensive case file. But instead of moving immediately to arrest, we coordinate with law enforcement for a controlled confrontation. They would come to your residence, present the evidence, and take him into custody with minimal public exposure. This would give you more control over the timing and circumstances, Eleanor added. It would also give you the opportunity to be present when he faces the consequences of his actions. I considered the options, weighing personal, professional, and ethical factors. The third approach makes the most sense, I decided. Let him complete his spending spree, return home thinking he's gotten away with it, and then face reality. Are you sure you want to be present for that? Marcus asked, concern evident in his voice. It will be intensely confrontational. Need to see his face, I said simply. I need to see the moment when he understands what's happened. Eleanor nodded, making notes. We'll coordinate with the Financial Crimes Division. In the meantime, continue as normal. Don't give him any reason to suspect that you know. That evening, another text from Victor arrived. One more day of meetings, then heading home. Can't wait to see you. I have exciting news. I wondered what fiction he had constructed to explain his sudden windfall of luxury goods and experiences. What imaginary investors or business deals would he invent to justify his new designer wardrobe and expensive accessories? I texted back, "Safe travels. Looking forward to hearing all about it." The final day of Victor's European fraud tour brought the most extravagant charges yet. A $5,000 shopping spree at a luxury watch boutique, resulting in the purchase of a Breguet timepiece that cost more than 3 months of our mortgage payments, a $2,800 dinner at a 3-Michelin-star restaurant overlooking the city, a last-minute upgrade to first class for his return flight, adding another $3,200 to his trail of financial crimes. By the time his plane took off from Barcelona, Victor had racked up over $60,000 in fraudulent charges in less than a week, all meticulously documented by our security system in a case file that now ran to more than 200 pages of transaction records, location data, timestamps, and digital evidence. Marcus called as I was leaving work. "The final report is ready," he said. "It's the most comprehensive fraud documentation we've ever compiled. Every transaction, every location, every piece of supporting evidence, all organized chronologically with pattern analysis." "Send me the executive summary," I requested. "I want to be fully prepared for tomorrow." That night, I sat at our dining room table reviewing the report. The clinical language of financial crime, perpetrator, fraudulent activity, criminal intent, created a strange disconnect. These words were describing my husband, the man whose toothbrush still sat next to mine in our bathroom, whose favorite coffee mug I had hand-washed that morning out of habit. I found myself staring at our wedding photo on the living room wall. We looked so happy, so full of promise. Had it all been an illusion? Had I built a life with someone who never truly existed outside my hopeful imagination? The doorbell rang at precisely 9 a.m. the next morning. My neighbor Sophia delivering a package that had been mistakenly left at her door. For a moment, I'd thought it might be the authorities arriving early, sending my heart racing. But no, we had agreed on a plan. The financial crimes officers would arrive at noon, giving Victor enough time to return home and settle in, but not enough time to hide his newly acquired luxuries. His flight was scheduled to land at 10:30 a.m. Allowing time for customs and the drive home, he would likely arrive around 11:45. Perfect timing for our planned confrontation. I spent the morning in strange, methodical activities, cleaning the already clean house, arranging and rearranging items on countertops, checking and rechecking the case file I'd received from Marcus. My body needed movement while my mind processed what was about to happen. At 11:20, my phone buzzed with a text from Victor. "Landed, heading home soon. Can't wait to see you." I took a deep breath and responded, "I'll be here. Safe drive." At 11:38, I received a call from Detective Rivera of the Financial Crimes Division. "We're in position, Ms. Chen. 2 unmarked vehicles, 4 officers. We'll approach once you confirm he's inside the residence." "Understood," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline now coursing through my system. "Thank you for your discretion in handling this matter." "Of course," the detective assured me. "We'll proceed exactly as discussed." At 11:52, I heard the distinctive sound of tires on our gravel driveway. Victor's arrival, right on schedule. I moved to the kitchen, positioning myself casually at the counter with a cup of coffee. The perfect picture of an unsuspecting wife. The white front door opened, and there he was. Tanned, smiling, dressed in clothing I'd never seen before, pulling a designer suitcase that was definitely new. The watch glinted on his wrist as he set down his bags, his entire demeanor radiating satisfaction and confidence. "Thanks for the platinum upgrade, darling," he announced, strutting into our kitchen with his designer luggage in tow. He casually tossed his new leather wallet onto the counter and stood there, insufferably smug in his crisp linen suit and Italian shoes that definitely weren't in our closet last week. "First-class champagne, 5-star hotels in Barcelona. You should see the photos from the yacht party." I couldn't help it. I burst out laughing. "What's so funny?" he demanded, frowning. "Oh, Victor," I said, smiling as I sipped my coffee. "You have absolutely no idea what you've just done." Victor's frown deepened, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "What are you talking about?" I took another slow sip of my coffee, savoring both its warmth and the moment. Nothing, I said lightly. Tell me more about Barcelona. It sounds like you had quite the experience. Relief washed over his features, his confidence returning as quickly as it had wavered. This was familiar territory for him, regaling me with tales of his supposed business triumphs while I listened supportively. It was incredible, he continued, pulling out his phone to show me photos. The contacts I made, the connections. This trip is going to change everything for us, Liv. I nodded encouragingly. I'd love to hear all about it. For the next 20 minutes, I watched as Victor spun an elaborate fiction about meetings with European investors, networking events with luxury travel executives, and promising partnerships for his concierge business. Each lie was illustrated, with photographic evidence that actually documented his fraudulent spending spree. The yacht day presented as a strategic meeting with maritime leisure investors. The Michelin-starred dinners recast as relationship building with potential clients. With each fabrication, I sent a text to Detective Rivera, who was waiting outside with his team. Need 10 more minutes, getting full confession. Because that's what this was, a confession. Every photo, every story, every detail Victor shared was another piece of evidence confirming his crimes. He just didn't realize I already knew the truth behind each carefully constructed lie. And this, he said proudly, pulling a small box from his jacket pocket, is something I picked up for you. He opened it to reveal a pair of diamond earrings, elegant, teardrop designs that sparkled even in the kitchen's modest lighting. They're beautiful, I said, genuinely surprised by the gesture. In all his self-indulgence, I hadn't expected him to think of me. Only the best for my brilliant wife, he replied, leaning in to kiss my cheek. Consider it a thank you for believing in me all these years. The payoff is finally coming. I carefully returned the earrings to their box, fighting a wave of conflicting emotions. Even in the midst of his massive fraud, Victor maintained the capacity to be thoughtful, or at least to perform thoughtfulness convincingly. How many other moments in our marriage had been similar performances, carefully calculated to maintain my trust and support? You shouldn't have, I said, the phrase carrying more meaning than he could possibly understand. Nonsense, he dismissed, with a wave. It's a small token compared to what's coming. The investors I met with are prepared to put serious capital into my platform. We're talking 7 figures, Liv. By this time next year, we'll be looking at vacation properties in the Mediterranean. I nodded, maintaining my supportive expression while texting Detective Rivera again. Ready in 5 minutes. That's wonderful news, I told Victor. Why don't you freshen up while I make us some lunch? You must be exhausted from the flight. Great idea, he agreed, loosening his tie. I'll just grab a quick shower. As soon as he disappeared upstairs, I called Detective Rivera. He's here. All evidence confirmed. He's currently upstairs showering. Best to wait until he's dressed and back downstairs. Understood, the detective replied. We'll approach in 15 minutes unless you signal otherwise. I moved through the kitchen with mechanical precision, assembling sandwiches neither of us would eat, arranging fruit on a plate that would soon be forgotten. My hands remained steady despite the gravity of what was about to happen. Years of managing high-pressure situations in my career had trained me well for crisis moments. Victor returned 20 minutes later, hair damp from the shower, changed into casual designer clothes that still had the fresh, unworn look of recent purchases. Something smells good, he remarked, sliding onto a stool at our kitchen island. I missed your cooking. European cuisine is fantastic, but there's nothing like home. I placed a plate in front of him, noting the new watch gleaming on his wrist. The Breguet he'd purchased for over $30,000 of stolen money. He followed my gaze and extended his arm, turning his wrist to display it better. Nice, isn't it? A little gift to myself for closing the deal. Limited edition. Very impressive, I agreed. You must be proud. I am, he admitted, cutting into his sandwich. But more than the material things, I'm proud of what this represents. After years of setbacks, things are finally happening, Liv. All those risks we took, all that patience, it's paying off. The calculated inclusion of we in his narrative was typical Victor, subtly reframing his years of failure and deception as a shared journey, a team effort. In his version of reality, his luxury spending wasn't self-indulgent theft, but rather a well-deserved reward for both of us. I checked the time. Detective Rivera and his team would be arriving any minute. This was my last opportunity to speak to Victor as his wife, before he became a fraud suspect in police custody. Victor, I said carefully, over the past 8 years, what would you say has been the secret to our marriage working despite the financial challenges? He looked up, surprised by the sudden shift to a serious topic. After a moment's consideration, he replied, "Trust. You trusted me when others wouldn't. You believed in my vision when everyone else thought I was just dreaming." He reached across the island to take my hand. That's why this breakthrough means so much. I can finally deliver on that trust. The irony was so profound, it almost took my breath away. In his mind, my trust had never been betrayed because he still intended to deliver success eventually. The means, stealing from me, were justified by his imagined ends. Trust is important, I agreed, gently withdrawing my hand. From his, so is honesty. A shadow crossed his face. What do you mean? I've always been honest with you, I said, maintaining steady eye contact. About my work, about our finances, about everything. Of course, he replied, a note of defensiveness entering his voice. We've always been honest with each other. The doorbell rang, right on schedule. Victor glanced toward the front of the house, irritation flashing across his features at the interruption. I'll get it, I said, standing up. It's probably that package I've been expecting. As I walked to the door, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The weeks of uncertainty, of watching evidence accumulate, of maintaining a facade of normalcy, all of it was about to end. Whatever came next would be difficult, but at least it would be real. I opened the door to find Detective Rivera and 3 other officers standing on our porch, their unmarked vehicles visible in our driveway. Ms. Chen, the detective greeted me formally, following our agreed-upon protocol. I'm Detective Rivera with the Financial Crimes Division. Is Victor Chen available to speak with us? Yes, I replied, stepping back to allow them entry. He's in the kitchen. Please come in. I led the officers through our home, aware of Victor's growing confusion as he watched our approach. He stood up from the island, sandwich forgotten, eyes darting between me and the 4 solemn-faced individuals now standing in our kitchen. Victor Chen? Detective Rivera asked, though he already knew the answer. Yes, Victor confirmed, his charm reflexively activating as he extended his hand. How can I help you? The detective ignored the offered handshake. Mr. Chen, we're here regarding a series of fraudulent transactions made over the past week in Barcelona, Spain, using stolen credit card information. The color drained from Victor's face. His eyes flicked to me, searching for explanation, for the support I had always provided during difficult moments. There must be some mistake, he said, voice steady despite the obvious shock. I was in Barcelona on business, yes, but all my expenses were legitimate. Detective Rivera removed a folder from his briefcase. The case file I had reviewed the night before, containing over 200 pages of meticulously documented evidence. We have comprehensive evidence indicating otherwise, Mr. Chen. Every transaction you made, every location you visited, every item you purchased, all documented as fraudulent activity against an account you illegally accessed. Victor's expression hardened as understanding began to dawn. This is absurd. My wife can verify that I was on a legitimate business trip. Olivia, tell them. All eyes turned to me. This was the moment I had anticipated for weeks, the confrontation I had carefully orchestrated, the revelation that would force Victor to face reality after years of living in convenient fictions. "The credit card you used in Barcelona," I said, evenly, "was a security test account from Meridian Financial, a honeypot specifically designed to catch and track fraud." Victor stared at me, comprehension slowly spreading across his features like a stain. "What are you talking about?" "I saw you, Victor," I continued calmly. "4 weeks ago, I watched you access my laptop and photograph my credit card details while you thought I was in the shower." His face contorted through a rapid succession of emotions: shock, denial, anger, calculation. "Olivia, this is crazy. I would never." "Every transaction triggered an alert," I interrupted, my voice still measured despite the tension filling the room. "Every purchase was logged in real time with your location data. The yacht charter, the Michelin-starred restaurants, the designer shopping sprees, the 5-star hotel suite, the watch you're wearing right now, purchased with stolen credit card. Information from an account specifically created to identify fraud." Victor's survival instincts kicked in, his mind visibly racing for an escape route. "This is all a misunderstanding." "I can explain." "Please do," Detective Rivera interjected, opening the case file on our kitchen island. "We're particularly interested in your explanation for these photos." He laid out a series of images, surveillance stills from various Barcelona establishments showing Victor using the fraudulent card, time-stamped and geotagged. Next to these were the corresponding transaction records, creating an irrefutable timeline of his activities. Victor's confidence finally crumbled as he looked at the evidence. His shoulders sagged, his carefully maintained facade cracking beneath the weight of incontrovertible proof. "Olivia," he said, his voice suddenly small, "you set me up." The accusation might have stung once, but now it only confirmed how fundamentally he misunderstood what had happened and who was responsible. "No, Victor," I corrected him. "You set yourself up. I simply let you." Detective Rivera stepped forward. "Mr. Chen, based on the evidence we have, I'm placing you under arrest for credit card fraud, identity theft, and criminal misuse of financial information. You have the right to remain silent." As the detective continued reciting Miranda rights, Victor's eyes remained fixed on me, bewildered, angry, betrayed. The irony of him feeling betrayed by me in this moment was not lost on either of us. One of the officers began cataloging Victor's possessions: the new watch, the designer clothes, the luggage full of fraudulently purchased items. Each piece would become evidence in the case against him. "The earrings, too," I said quietly, sliding the box across the counter. "They were purchased with the stolen card information." Victor watched in stunned silence as the diamond earrings he had presented as a gift were bagged and tagged as evidence of his crimes. "Ms. Chen," Detective Rivera said, turning to me, "we'll need you to come to the station to provide a formal statement. Would you prefer to follow separately?" "Yes," I replied. "I'll be there shortly." As the officers prepared to escort Victor out, he made one last attempt to leverage our relationship. "Olivia, you can't let this happen," he pleaded. "We're married. We can work this out between us." I looked at the stranger who had shared my home, my bed, and my life for 8 years. The man who had stolen from me without hesitation, who had lied to my face moments after returning from spending tens of thousands in fraudulently obtained funds. "We were married," I corrected him. "Consider this an irreconcilable difference." As Victor was led away in handcuffs, still wearing his Barcelona purchases and expressions of disbelief, I remained in the kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of our interrupted lunch. The half-eaten sandwiches, the carefully arranged fruit, the life I had built on shifting sands. I allowed myself exactly 5 minutes to absorb what had just happened. Then I called Marcus. "It's done," I said when he answered. "They've taken him into custody." "How are you holding up?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. I paused, assessing my emotional state with the same analytical thoroughness I applied to risk assessments at work. I'm relieved. It's finally over. Do you need anything? Someone to go with you to the station? No, I replied, straightening my shoulders. I can handle this part on my own. I'll be in the office tomorrow as usual. Olivia, Marcus said gently, no one would expect you to. I'll be in tomorrow, I repeated firmly. The international security protocol launch is next week. We still have work to do. After ending the call, I walked through our home, my home now, seeing it through new eyes. The spaces that had been filled with tension and uncertainty for so long now held possibility. The weight of maintaining a relationship built on deception had been lifted. The constant vigilance, the careful monitoring of our finances, the endless cycle of hope and disappointment, all of it was finally over. I sat on my sofa, allowing the emotions I had carefully compartmentalized to surface gradually. There was sadness, yes, but it was the sadness of mourning something that had died long ago. What I felt most powerfully was liberation. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Rivera. Formal interview scheduled for 3 p.m. Take your time. Had 2 hours before I needed to head to the police station. 2 hours to begin processing the end of my marriage and the beginning of whatever came next. I decided to start with something small but symbolic. Walking into our bedroom, I opened Victor's closet and began methodically removing his clothes, the evidence of his actual taste and financial situation, not the designer items he'd fraudulently acquired in Barcelona. These ordinary shirts and pants and shoes represented the real Victor, the one who had lived beyond his means, who had resented my success while depending on it, who had ultimately betrayed the foundation of our relationship for a week of luxury. Packed everything into suitcases, working with efficient detachment. When Victor was eventually released, whether on bail or after serving whatever sentence his crimes warranted, he would not be returning to this house. That chapter was definitively closed. As I worked, I realized I felt no rage, no burning desire for revenge. What I felt instead was a profound commitment to clarity, to seeing reality plainly and responding appropriately. For years, I had allowed emotion and hope to cloud my judgment about Victor and our marriage. Now, like a fog lifting, I could see everything with perfect clarity. By the time I left for the police station, Victor's belongings were packed and waiting by the front door. Our shared life had been efficiently dismantled in under 2 hours. 8 years of marriage, reduced to 3 suitcases and a duffel bag. As I drove to provide my formal statement about the fraud case against my husband, I realized that the most valuable thing I had recovered wasn't the money he had attempted to steal, or the material possessions I would retain in our inevitable divorce. It was my clear-sightedness, my ability to trust myself and my perceptions, my refusal to accept comfortable fictions over uncomfortable truths, and that, I decided, was worth every painful revelation the past 4 weeks had brought. 6 months have passed since that day in my kitchen when Victor's carefully constructed world collapsed around him. He pled guilty to all charges, receiving a suspended sentence, mandatory financial counseling, and 5 years of probation. The court ordered full restitution of the fraudulent charges, money he's struggling to repay with his new job at a car rental agency. I filed for divorce the same week as his arrest. It was finalized 3 months later, remarkably straightforward given the circumstances. Sometimes I catch myself looking for red flags I might have missed early on, moments where I could have changed course. But dwelling on the past isn't in my nature. Last week, I received a letter from Victor, his first communication since the divorce. He apologized, not just for the theft, but for years of taking advantage of my trust and support. It seemed sincere, but perhaps that's what I always thought about Victor, that his performances were genuine. I didn't respond. Some chapters are better left closed. My home is peaceful now, filled with possibilities rather than disappointments. The woman who was willing to compromise herself for someone else's dreams has been replaced by someone more discerning, more self-assured, and infinitely more free. More free.